Well, ladies and gentlemen, kind beings, gentle aliens across the 28 known galaxies, this is an incredible privilege for me to have this next guest. First of all, the man is immense. He's one of the nicest men in Hollywood that I've ever met. And he wrote, let's face it, some Star Trek books that I really like, beginning with Federation, the first 150 years. He wrote the autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard, the autobiography of James T. Kirk. He's writing another biography he'll tell us about. But that's not all he did. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the most, I think, prolific, amazing writer-producers in Hollywood, beginning with the Golden Girls. The man wrote the Golden Girls. Now, let me just break some things down. He wrote Wings. He wrote for my beloved Martin Tupper in Dream On. It's amazing. He wrote for Futurama. He wrote for Star Trek Enterprise. He wrote Fred the movie and Fred Night of the Living Fred 2, which I don't know what they are, but he can tell us that too. He wrote video games. He wrote Lego Batman. He wrote Family Guy. He's currently the executive producer of the Orville, which is the best Star Trek show on television right now. It's amazing. And not only that, the man he's in his second term as the president of the Writers Guild of America, which is, they don't have any problems or they don't have anything to deal with over there. My God, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot believe I'm talking to him. David Goodman. No one can clap for you, David, but thanks for coming on the show.
I'm thrilled to be here, Rob.
Well, I have to say you were very generous when we were doing the Enterprise Blu-rays, when Roger Lay and I were doing and you even pinch hitted for Brandon Braga when he didn't show up to his own hosting when we did the round table discussion.
I think didn't we end up all sort of starting to make fun of Brandon when he wasn't there?
We put his picture on an iPad. It was amazing. Well, while I've got you here, thanks first of all very much for doing this. What I'd love to know, I know you grew up in New York, Brooklyn?
New Rochelle, New York, suburb of New York.
Now, when you were a kid, were you a movie fan? Did you ever see yourself as becoming a writer-producer in Hollywood on television?
It's interesting. At some point, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but at some point, I made that sort of leap to start to identify. I think, honestly, I made little animated movies when I was in junior high school, and cut out a lot of spaceship stuff, and then I think when I finally read The Making of Star Trek,
the Whitfield book, Stephen Whitfield.
Stephen Whitfield, yeah, that book probably opened my mind to the idea of being weirdly not a writer but a story editor on a series, somebody who would rewrite other people's stuff. For some reason, that I thought I would be really good at that. Not, necessarily coming up with the ideas, but helping shape something.
Wow.
And that is it's like a weird thing that's what I hooked into, because that is still so much of what the work that I do is, that I'm working in someone else's playground. And, but that was really it. I mean, obviously, when growing up Jewish, this was in the 70s when, Spielberg becomes this sort of celebrity director, and you identify with him. And then, Star Wars, I'm sure you've talked endlessly about what it was like, you and I around the same age, to go in and see Star Wars, see those letters come down and those ships come down, and you felt like this movie was made for me. I'm getting all these references to Flash Gordon and Dune, and nobody else could be getting these references. This movie's for me.
That's how I felt.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. And I mean, the letters going up. I mean, right out of Flash Gordon. There's no way that audience understood the reference, and they didn't need to, obviously. But there was a way in which suddenly movies seemed to be being made for us in Starlog magazine. There's this great issue of Starlog, I'm sure you remember it, Make Your Own Science Fiction Movies, and it was like cheap in-camera tricks, which I did. I made these little movies with my sister and friends.
They made an offshoot magazine called Cinemagic.
Yes, I subscribed.
And it was, and every time they would come out, you'd have to try something. Were you shooting? I was shooting with a Minolta XL601 because it had an intervalometer that I could shoot single frame.
I had it was a Bell and Howell, and then I had a Bauer.
Ooh.
And then I could put the attach I forgot what it was called, but it was like you could attach something to the camera and pump it.
Right.
And then I was given the Starlog magazine was talking about how single 8, the original 8mm, was actually better for doing special effects because you could turn the cartridge around and do superimposition. And,
yeah.
And I did that, and because my uncle was a cameraman of a sort, and he got me these old cameras, and it was just great. So.
Had you read the Whitfield book before you saw Star Wars? Because when I was a kid, I mean, I pored over that book endlessly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I read it. I think I read it. It was probably around the same time.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, we were at that sweet spot when what people don't understand is there was nothing like Star Wars before Star Wars came out. I mean, we had of course 2001, but we were kids, and it wasn't like you could have seen it in the theater. Maybe I was a little too young to have seen it in the theater when it came out. But I loved Star Trek. I loved the Irwin Allen shows like Lost in Space or Time Tunnel or Village or Land of the Giants, and I would watch anything. Logan's Run had come out the year before Star Wars. Were you someone who was not just watching, but were you reading the books, and were you using audio cassettes to tape to show off TV?
Yeah, well, so like I was this giant Star Trek fan. It's so funny about Logan's Run. I saw it 3 times in the theater. This to me is a sign of how little the American audience pays attention to credits. I saw it 3 times in the theater and never noticed it was written by David Goodman. On the screen. Like it's a giant letters on the screen over the City of Domes, and I didn't notice my name was on the screen, and I didn't notice it.
And isn't his middle name is Zelig, isn't it? David Zelig Goodman.
David Zelig Goodman,
the greatest name ever.
Great name, much better than mine. And so I watched Star Trek. It was on Channel 11 in New York, 6:00 every night. I recorded with cassette player episodes, and I would listen to them, and people just thought I was just the biggest nerd for that. I took so much abuse for that, especially when I brought them to camp. I don't know what I was thinking. And I remember that my favorite episodes, I think it was Mirror Mirror was definitely, I probably could do that because I would listen to that tape so could every line of dialogue. But in any event, I also had a friend who got me, who introduced me to the fanzines, which I didn't love, but the sort of fan-produced fan fiction, which were mimeographed, things that people would copy. I mean, and then whatever I could learn about making movies, because my dad was a psychologist. My mother was a social worker. There was nobody in my family who had anything to do with the business. And there was no internet. There was no way to connect to it at all. Right? These days, it's the heyday. If you want to be in the business, you can just start filming something and put it on online. You're a movie maker. I mean, it's like back then you really sort of out there by yourself. I mean, you find friends who maybe share your interest, and certainly Star Trek was definitely my gateway drug to science fiction, but also movie making, television writing, all the things that have sort of ended up being what my career is.
Yeah. So when did you start to get serious about any of it? Was it in high school? Was it in college? Was it after college?
It was in college. I really never thought it was possible. Like I just didn't. I came from, again, parents split up when I was young. My mother raised 3 kids on a social work salary, not a lot of money. I had to be really focused on being practical. It wasn't like, so I went to college, and in college I met a guy who, this guy's name is Jeremiah Bosgang, and he was...
What a great name.
great name, and he was a guy who, by the time he was already in college, he had already been an intern writer on Letterman.
Wow. Now, where were you going to college?
At that moment, I was at the University of Chicago, and where Indiana Jones went. And I actually worked in the alumni office, and I put a card for Indiana Jones in the card file. Anyway, I made up a bunch of papers he wrote. Anyway, what did I do? Oh, anyway, so I met this guy, and he suddenly, I didn't know anybody who worked in Hollywood. And it's an interesting thing about Jeremiah is he ended up being an executive, and he was one of the executives who worked on Seinfeld for NBC. He's the third guy in those Seinfeld episodes. He's not the actor, but the third guy who was always there. Yeah, what happened to those raisins? That's a portrayal of Jeremiah, but it looks just like him. But it's a little trivia. Anyway, there's something about meeting somebody who'd already done it, who'd already written
for
television. And that opened my mind up to at least the possibility of it. But I graduated college, and I needed to get a job. I needed to support myself. I ended up trying to figure out how could I be a writer. I wasn't necessarily thinking television, but in New York, there are a lot of entry-level jobs in publishing. And I ended up working at Simon & Schuster in this weird department, subsidiary rights. And in that department, movie and TV production companies would call, try finding out the rights. And I ended up sneaking manuscripts to people and just kind of networking. And one of them offered me a job in this TV production company in New York, where I met my writing partner at the time. And we ended up writing these 2 spec scripts, and then I ended up working for this woman named Gloria Banta, who'd been a sitcom writer in the 70s. She wrote for Mary Tyler Moore and Rhoda. The character Tony Banta on Taxi is named after her. And she submitted our work, ironically, at the end of the 88 writer's strike. She submitted our work to the producers of Golden Girls, and they hired us.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it was crazy.
So that's the first time a script of yours had ever been, you co-wrote it with her?
I co-wrote it with my writing partner at the time.
Oh.
She was my boss. She submitted it.
And that was nice of her. And was this your first script?
It was good. She thought, it's like you see this all the time in this business. Somebody thinks your writing's good, they'll, help you out. But crazy. No,
what was it like if you could take us through finding out that you'd sold something for the very first time? What was that like for you?
Well, it wasn't just that. It wasn't that they sold, because we didn't sell anything. Basically, they hired us on staff off of a spec script.
which is basically, for those people who don't know, in television, that's probably the dream, isn't it? To get hired on.
Yeah, well, it was crazy. I was basically a secretary. I was living in one room in New York City, my partner was living in Queens. We get this call on my answering machine from Tony Thomas. Tony Thomas was one of the executive producers of the Golden Girls. His father was Danny Thomas, the famous, his sister's Marlo Thomas. Anyway, his secretary calls. I have a call from Tony Thomas. Please give us a call back. I call my partner. We conference. We're just like, what? And then we call him back, and he's like, your scripts were top notch. But the problem is you guys are in New York. And at the exact same time, it was so much at the exact same time that I didn't hear my partner say it, and he didn't hear me say it. We said in unison, we'll move. And, because it was, he was offering us this dream job.
Amazing.
To come and write on a top 10 show. I mean, back then in 1988, when we got hired, millions of people were watching,
right.
30 million people watched the show. I mean, it's crazy numbers. And, you're working with the top level of comedy writers in the business. I'm 25 years old. It was crazy.
Did you
Really.
did you get to call up your mom and say, "Hey, mom, guess what? Did she watch Golden Girls?" I mean, when this had to be a huge coup for you to tell her this.
It's so funny. I don't really like to insult my mother, but she wasn't that excited.
What?
So my mother, may she rest in peace. She really almost up till, for her, the fact that I was leaving New York was like a bigger deal than the fact that I was writing for television. But she also, in every conversation, she was always worried I didn't have something to fall back on. Even like right up to the end. Like I've been doing it for 28 years. She still was like, "You still maybe it might not work out." She was not from the great school of mothering. It was more like, you got to be careful. And she was a child of the Depression.
Right.
The most money she made, her salary when she retired was $40,000 a year. I mean, she, never had money. Never. We didn't struggle, but I mean, 3 kids by herself.
Yeah.
I can certainly understand why she wasn't like, but yeah, no, you would think my mother would have been, oh my God, so thrilled, but not really. She was proud, but I don't think.
So were you then thrust into a writer's room for the first time?
Well, it's funny. Golden Girls, the way that those showrunners ran that show was very unusual. It was, by the time we got there, it was a machine. It was 4 showrunners all working together, which is also very unusual. 2 teams of 2, 4 super talented writers, and they did a thing where the script was written, they would rewrite the script, and then they would parcel out pages. They would say, "Everybody work on this joke or this scene or this bit."
Interesting.
And then you basically almost literally slip them under their door, and then the next day at the run through, you'd find out if your joke made it. And it was really so there was a different kind of writers room exchange. Again, my partner and I did very well that first year, and there were a lot of great writers on there. Christopher Lloyd, co-creator of Modern Family, that was his first job. He was there.
Did you feel a pressure? I mean, when you're given a page, like you have to perform, and having not had experience in the business before, this being your first job, did you feel the pressure to perform, or was this all new to you, or was it something that you were excited about? Were you having a good time?
I think my partner and I probably didn't know how well we had it. I mean, we weren't full of ourselves, but we were also like, they give us a job. We sat down and did the job, and he and I, this guy named Rick Kopp, super talented, super funny guy. We had a good chemistry in terms of how we worked, and we could judge each other, be honest with each other, be harsh with each other, and that's really.
I can't say it, but I directed a few of his scripts for Femme Fatales.
Did you really?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did, and I love him.
He's the greatest guy.
I love him.
He's a great guy. And we had a good, honest partnership in the fact of, unless we both liked it, it didn't go in the script. And that's kind of a thing you need. That's, that especially when you're starting out, to have, for me, starting out, I needed somebody to tell me that's not good enough. And I also he inspired me. He had such a unique point of view that wasn't mine at all. So I think that was the thing. We leaned on each other during that period, but then the next year, just sort of talking about it. I mean, the next year, a new showrunner came in and didn't like our work, and that's where I don't think we rose to the challenge. That showrunner didn't like us, so that didn't help us. And then because we were new, we didn't navigate our way out of it. And so after the second season, they fired us. So we did very well the first year and the second year. But that also taught us both a valuable lesson of who your boss is now. It didn't matter how well we did the first year.
Right.
This is the boss. And from that point on, when we worked on shows, we did, my partner and I did very well together. We did 6 or 7 shows together.
So when you had that experience, I mean, you get this incredible opportunity, and then as it happens, people outside the business don't understand how fortunes can change so quickly. You know, you're living high on the hog, you're doing this, hey, it's great, and then the next year, well, wait, what's wrong with my work? And then you're out on your ass. What was it like after that? Like you said, you didn't do a great job leaving, but then how did you pick yourself up and find the wherewithal to continue on?
Well, we were lucky in the sense that, agencies, because we were on Golden Girls, every agency in town wanted to sign us.
Oh, that's good.
So that our first year, so we signed with CAA, and
Them
them
in the late '80s or whatever, early '90s. Yeah.
That agent, just did work about hustling to get us to meet other showrunners, and we kept working. So like we had our Golden Girls episode as a spec, but then we also wrote a new spec that was a new sort of writing sample, and then it would be submitted, and we would meet showrunners, and then really this one job, the job after Golden Girls, was actually ended up being probably for a long time the most important job of our career. It was a show called Babes. It was about three overweight sisters sharing an apartment in New York. Something
you knew nothing about.
What's that?
Something you knew nothing about.
Nothing about. And the showrunners were two guys, a guy named Brian Levant and a guy named Jordan Moffat. Brian read our stuff, met us, liked us, and we got hired. And Jordan liked us, and we got hired on the staff. And we did very well on the staff on the show that nobody watched. But every job after that can be traced directly or indirectly back to that job. So, for instance, Brian Levant actually got fired off of that show as the showrunner, but then went on as a movie director. He directed first movie was Problem Child 2, then The Flintstones, Beethoven. Are We There Yet? I mean, he's done a lot of movies, and my partner and I worked with him a lot. He's still a good friend. And then Jordan Moffat, who was this showrunner of that show, ended up getting another show a couple years later, but he also recommended us to his friends and former colleagues, as did Brian. And we ended up 4 or 5 jobs after that were all directly related to that job. So that to me is always the thing, is like Golden Girls didn't lead actually to any jobs. Honestly, people talk about it more now, but it was Babes, this forgotten kind of bad show. You can see some of it on YouTube. That actually is more important in my career because we did well in it, and because the people were good people who liked us and who helped us get work.
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, I guess the seeds of that now, what was it like to have an agent who was trying to get you work, and the relationship, if you could talk about the relationship you had with that agent back then, because I just read an article out on my show today about how the business has completely changed and what agencies are doing and all that, and what the Writers Guild is dealing with and all of that. But at the time, having now an agent, what was that like for you? And were you happy with your agent back then?
Very happy. I mean, I've had a lot of great agents over the course of my career who've really made huge differences. And, really what that's about is finding somebody that likes your work, that has some kind of, I think, critical taste, and says, I like your work, I get your work, I know how to sell you. And somebody who's going to present you with ideas of things that you might not have considered doing, but also who's going to listen to you about what it is you want to do. And I think at that moment in time, for Rick and me, we just wanted to work. We wanted to be on sitcoms. And so Kevin Cooper, who was our agent at the time, and then these other agents at CA, but Kevin was really at that moment critical, just did a great job of sort of finding people he thought would like our stuff, pushing them to read us, pushing them to meet us. And one of those was Jordan Moffat, who, ended up being a real godfather to me and Rick for a number of years. So that's the work that agent did, and then make in terms of making a deal, making sure that you're being properly compensated and understanding what people are getting paid for the kind of work you're doing, and making sure that you're getting as much as you can. And
Right.
But I think good agents are still plenty of them out there, still plenty of them understanding, doing their work of understanding the business and how to get their clients work.
Well, now I have to ask you, obviously in the late 80s, early 90s, Next Generation was on the air. Then in 93, Deep Space Nine was launched. Being a Star Trek fan, was there ever any thought, now that you have an agent, you're at CAA, did you ever try and get yourself into Star Trek during the TNG DS9 era?
I pitched to every Star Trek show, every single one. I pitched to Next Generation in the 7th season. I pitched to Renee Echevarria.
Yeah.
Then and to Ron Moore and Brandon Braga, who at the time was just like this Writers Guild intern. That was my first pitch, was to Ron and Brandon, and then Renee in the 7th season. And then I pitched to Deep Space Nine. There was one time I pitched to the entire DS9 writing staff. It was crazy. I'm like, how did this happen? And they always seemed to like me. They always seemed to, some ideas they would say, you know what, we're going to talk about this one. And I could never make a sale, but I pitched to Jerry Taylor. I assume your audience knows who these people are. I pitched to Brandon again on Voyager. Robert Wolf and I became friends after I pitched to him. I desperately wanted to get a Star Trek freelance, and I tried numerous times while I was also working with my partner on other things.
Do you think it was because they saw you as comedy writers?
No, I did that by myself. I knew, because I got close with one idea. For them, it was about the idea. For them, it was like they were truly honest brokers. They weren't interested in, putting me in a box and saying this guy can't write. I had an agent. I was a writer. I had credits. They took the pitches.
Right.
I actually wrote a Star Trek Next Generation spec that I know Michael Piller read. That my agent got in. And Michael Piller read, and he said no to it, but that's fine. But I also know now, having written Star Trek, what I was doing wrong. Like, I look back at my work and I was like, oh yeah, no wonder I never sold anything. You once you're in there, once you understand, you can watch the show, and again, I think really talented writers can figure out how the show is written without having worked there. I wasn't that good.
Interesting.
And so I never really figured it out. I was such a big Star Trek fan. I thought that was enough. And now I think I understand something else about that, which is, writing, the rules of writing transfer to every show, comedy and drama. You've got to care about your characters. All those things. The story has to be compelling, has to feel fresh. And I wasn't doing that.
One of the things, like I have been in the feature world, such as it is, such as my career is, but mostly the indie feature world, and I don't know anything. I've never been in a television writer's room. I've never written for television. I wonder if you could sort of give, in 50 words or less, what is it like? A lot of writers, you write a spec script for a show to prove that you can write. That's a show you're not writing on. But what is it like to write for a show? Like, how do you write for an ongoing show? What are some pieces of advice you might give for, you said, coming into someone else's world? What are some things that you learned? I mean, maybe based on now what you know about Star Trek, what are some, I guess, basic rules to writing for television as you see them?
Well, to me, it's your work has to be, you're the first audience. So before you even get that job, when you're writing the things that you want to get people's attention, to get people to say, all right, I want to work with this person. if that's your goal. If your goal is to get other writers or studio execs or whoever it is to hire you, the work first on the page has to really be really good. And what I always sort of say, especially in comedy, but I think this is true in drama too, that if you're writing a script and it's coming easy and it's flowing off your fingertips, you are writing a piece of shit. That writing is fucking hard. If you're writing a comedy script, that script has to make you laugh every time you read it. That sounds impossible. It's not, but it's really, really hard. And the same goes through, I think, for every other genre. Horror. You write a horror script, that script should scare you when you read it. Because if it doesn't scare you, you have no proof it's going to scare anyone else.
Yeah.
A drama, if the script's supposed to move you, it's supposed to make you cry, whatever, the script shouldn't move you. And that, to me, that's the best advice I can give to a writer who's starting out, is that your work, you're the first audience. And the best work will move you every time you read it, whether it's make you laugh, make you cry, make you scared, make you excited, whatever it is that you want that script to accomplish as a script, should make you as the reader have that experience. And it sounds impossible. You can say, well, I mean, in a comedy, I know all the jokes. I'm not going to laugh. It's not impossible, but it's really, really hard. So that's the advice I give in terms of getting the job. In terms of working in a writer's room, you know, a lot of this is personal chemistry. You're working generally for somebody. Your job in that case is to sort of get in their head as much as possible. And I've worked, you know, you probably get to this later, I've worked with Seth MacFarlane for a very long time.
Yeah.
Seth's my boss. He treats me like a partner, but, you know, I'm trying to write for Seth, for this Family Guy, when I ran American Dad, when I did, when I'm doing ORVILLE. And so part of that is just listening to him both what he says and what he doesn't say, what he likes, what he says he doesn't like, what you see him write. You know, you're sort of making this sort of constant, ongoing calculation of what is the job he wants done for this show. And so, and it's never about you. That's at least my success working for other people is, if my joke doesn't get in, it's upsetting, but you move on.
Right.
And, you know, if my idea for the episode, everybody's liking it, and then suddenly nobody's liking it, I might fight for it once, but if nobody's liking it, you let it go and you move on.
Well, another thing I wanted to ask you is that at the time, in the early 90s, there was a lot of transition happening in the television industry. HBO was doing shows like, you know, Dream On, which is a show I really liked, and you were on that. And then you had Paramount was starting UPN, and Fox was going to dip their toe into the world with FX and Fox and all of that. And was there I guess at the time, was this sort of shifting landscapes of how the networks, we were sort of moving off the networks and there was more opportunity for shows. Was that something that you were availing yourself of? Were you taking advantage of that? And was it something you were even aware of, how television was really beginning to change?
Not really. I think that part of the thing that happens with any business is the people who are doing the business don't want it to change. So, for instance, you know, Fox started its network. You know, the great stories I think about Fox's first years was there were all these shows they tried to do that were sort of traditional sitcom kinds of shows in comedy. And they had two shows that sat on the shelf for a year at least before they put them on. In Living Color and The Simpsons. The executives at the network didn't like those shows. They didn't think they'd succeed. They put them on, they blew up. And, you know, Simpsons, I mean, historically they had 13 episodes because it's animated, it takes so long to make new ones. They reran the hell out of those first 13 because people loved it. And so part of the thing is that even if the business side of it was changing, the people doing it weren't. It was still the same, a lot of the same people.
Sure.
And so a lot of those forgotten sitcoms that were developed for Fox were very traditional. Dream On was, the creation of that show was, I believe it was Marta Kaufman and David Crane who created Friends, where young writers were asked, we've got this whole library of old movies that are public domain that we could use in a show, come up with an idea to use them, I think is the story. I don't know. I never heard from them. But, and because they were so sort of new and fresh and talented, they came up with Dream On, which was this kind of great way to use all those clips.
I loved it. Loved it. And boobs. There was
it was HBO, so you had to have nudity.
There was boobs in every episode. Old movies and boobs. What's not to love?
What's not to love? So if only they had spaceships, that could be the show.
That would be a trifecta for me right there. But so that was, I think, HBO was because it was new and because it was so untraditional and because I think lots of big names didn't recognize HBO's potential. Yeah.
HBO got into business with some new people who came up with something kind of fresh, and but then also like the show, like one of the greatest shows ever made, which was made for HBO, the Larry Sanders Show, got terrible ratings. Nobody really watched it.
Okay.
I mean, brilliant. It's a piece of brilliance. It's every show every episode's a nugget of gold.
Oh,
and yet at the time nobody was really watching it. So the business was changing slowly. I think that changed to cable. Basic cable made a big difference, and then the sort of all these shows. Suddenly, there's this over 100 shows on the air, which was a big jump. I think in the late 90s, like 98, there was like 57. I think with the year there was like 57 sitcoms on the air. I mean, just crazy.
Well, and also because Star Trek, really transformed also first run syndication too.
Right,
so there was dramas that were on that were never be on. I mean, I remember when UPN launched in '95, they had shows like Nowhere Man, which was kind of a prisoner riff, and there was all this. It's a good show.
It's a great show.
I really wish that it.
Did you just see it behind me? Is that what you think of?
No, I did not. I absolutely did not know that was. I think about The Prisoner. I had no idea that was behind you. I didn't see it. I wasn't even looking for that. All I can see is that you've got behind. Well, to my right, you've got the Star Trek hardcovers that have the newspaper Star Trek scripts.
Yes.
That's how much of a nerd I am.
There's also the UK strips. I have the one with the UK strips.
Oh, yeah, which is, you got to have that. But so it was, the television landscape was changing. And first run syndication was something new.
Yeah.
Drama. I mean, in terms of dramas, it used to be game shows and talk shows.
Right.
And then you've got cable exploding as well. I mean, Dream On led to things like, I think Dream On led to things like Sex and the City.
Yeah, it did. No, absolutely.
And so what about you personally? Now, how are you navigating the landscape of being a writer in the 90s?
Well, what happened was Rick and I, even though we'd fallen into comedy and we were pretty good at it, we both had also wanted to write 1 hour action adventure. So we got this deal at Universal, and they asked us if we wanted to do Team Knight Rider. Now that's all they had. Team Knight Rider. They pre-sold it. It was already sold. There was no premise other than there would be multiple talking cars and that Ford would provide the car.
Come on, man, that's enough. That's all you need.
So my partner and I, Rick and I, were big Man from U.N.C.L.E. fans, and we were like, we can do like a combination of like Knight Rider and Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Now, were you the creators on this, or were you working?
We were. We co-created Team Knight Rider. We produced it. It was extremely low budget. It was first run syndication. Before that, actually, I forgot that. What led to the deal at Universal was with Brian Levant. Brian had this idea of doing a show about a 50s actor who plays a sci-fi hero on television being transported to save these people who think he's a real hero on the other side of the galaxy. It was called The Adventures of Captain Zoom in Outer Space. Now, it may sound like Galaxy Quest,
Right.
but it was 3 years before Galaxy Quest.
Yeah.
So who stole who? I don't know, and I'm not accusing anybody.
Or who's zooming who?
What's that?
Who's zooming who?
Who's zooming who? So we did that. We did it. It was a pilot. It was like a 2-hour pilot that we did. We shot in Vancouver. Ron Perlman was in it. Michelle Nichols was in it. Liz Vassy, Gia Carides, and we shot it, and it was going to be a series for Stars. It was going to be the first made for Stars TV series, and would also air on First Run syndication, and then it all fell apart, as deals often do.
Yeah.
But then they kept it. But that was a very exciting thing to get to do. I remember my first day on set in Vancouver. Brian couldn't be on set because at the time he was, I think he was directing Beethoven or something. So it was Rick and I were the on-set producers, and I'm standing there, and they do this test of this giant fan, and to have the actors in the fan, and they do the test, they do the rehearsal, and they turn it off the fan, and I'm just sort of standing there, and I turn and look, and the director and the line producer are all like standing there looking at me, and they're clearly waiting for me to say, "Is that okay?" And I'm like, "That was fucking awesome." Because I forgot in that moment I was actually the boss.
Right.
And that it was a great experience. An actor named Dan Rudin who played Captain Zoom. You can see some of it also on YouTube. But that ended up leading to Team Knight Rider, which we ran. We didn't really have. We had 2 people sort of on staff, but for the most, a guy named Steve Crozier was on our staff.
Yes, Steve. I know Steve.
And we hired a bunch of freelancers, and we did that show, and it really didn't come out very well.
Well, now if you could, like, it's one thing. I've often talked about how television is a writer-producer's medium as opposed to, say, motion pictures, which is a director's medium.
Right.
So really a television producer, a creator, a showrunner. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about falling into that role, and what was it like transitioning from being a screenwriter to actually running a show?
It was difficult. This was our first time that we were doing it, and in some ways it's easy because I really do think that the best shows are about the writing. And my partner and I were trying to do something fun. I mean, we're doing something that was very lighthearted, but that had jeopardy. I think the problem with the show was the budget was very limited, and that's the key of a good showrunner, is someone who either knows how to get more money out of the studio or knows how to work right within a budget so that the flaws don't show. And so we were sort of thrown into the deep end doing that, and I think our eyes were a little too big for the type of show we were doing. So that's really, to me, the key is that it starts with the writing. The scripts have to be good. Have to be, again, going back to the thing I said earlier about those scripts need to move you or make you laugh or whatever it is. The scripts have to be great, and then it's about collaborating with your production team in a way, and your studio, so that you are getting the most bang for your buck, and that you're both being a responsible producer, but also knowing when to fight a battle to get more.
Now, was this your first experience? Were you getting notes from the studio, and did you have to go to battle with them over content or story points that you wanted to make, and what was that like?
In first syndication, it was kind of a dream. The execs that we worked for, they had general ideas of what they wanted, but they weren't nitpicky guys. These were the execs who did. These were the execs who did Hercules and Xena, which were huge successes for them. and they learned from that model, which was hire the people you want and let them do the show they want to do.
Mm.
And
That's a dream.
It was great, but you know, our show lasted a year, so it was. So
Well, what do you attribute that to?
I think if I had to guess, I think, you know, people who watch a show like Knight Rider, who were fans of shows like Knight Rider, they could watch the same stunt with the car every week. And that was not something I wanted to do.
Right.
But that's what I should have done. I ignored the brand. The brand is Knight Rider. Cars doing jumps, cars doing, you know, crashes, explosions. We had a lot of that. But we focused on the characters in a way that I think we went away from our brand. We had a brand. We needed to. That's what I would say, is that the brand doesn't. If the brand that's bringing people in, make sure they're satisfied, and then build on top of that. I think that's if you're working on a franchise, you have a responsibility to the fans of that franchise.
Right. Well, that's something that wow. Yeah. Okay. What interesting thinking in this day and age. That's good to hear you say that, sir. So then after a year, did you feel like, again, every time a show ends, how did you feel? Did you feel you were back to square one, or did you have to regroup and start over? Were you optimistic, or do you fall into a depression and take lots of pills and drink? I mean, like, what did you do when something ended?
Well, during the period of doing the show, I had a child, and that changes everything.
Right.
My partner was still single, and this is where our partnership started to break up, because suddenly, whereas he and I, over the course of the first 10 years of our career, we could just sort of do whatever we wanted, wait for the job, look for the... Now I had to work.
Right.
I had a house, I had a kid, and that changed our partnership.
Yeah.
We split up, but very amicably, because basically what I decided was, in that moment in time, I was taking stock of what my job possibilities were.
Out of necessity.
Out of necessity, and everyone I knew worked in sitcom. All the people we'd come up with when we were doing sitcom were now running shows and or working on shows, and all my contacts were in sitcom. And you know, I had a heart to heart with my partner, and I said, I need to go back to working in sitcoms, because that's where all the employment is. I can't pursue the 1 hour thing at this moment.
Yeah.
And we split up very amicably. He went on, you know, he's done a lot of stuff himself after that. I ended up on a sitcom called Stark Raving Mad. It was my first job by myself as a writer, working for a guy named Steve Levitan. And then after that, I ended up at Family Guy, which was in its third season, about to get canceled. And then at the end of Family Guy, Seth, I'd wanted to get on Futurama from the minute I heard it got picked up. I mean, sci-fi comedy. I thought, this is perfect. And I couldn't get in the door. My agent couldn't get me an interview. Seth got me an interview. After Family Guy got canceled, he said, you know, he called over there, and I had a job interview. And then they hired me.
And was that the first time Family Guy got canceled?
Yes, that was the second time.
Second time.
So Family Guy was canceled after second season. Then they brought it back for its third season. That's the year I worked there. My first job in animation. Learned so much.
Right.
And then I was basically the second in command to Seth and Dan Palladino, who were the showrunners. And because again, it was all about the writing. And Dan and I had worked together for years on years ago on a show, and he brought me in essentially to replace it. He was going to be leaving to go work on the Gilmore Girls, and he brought me in to help Seth run the show. if it got picked up after the third season, but it didn't. It got canceled.
When you first met Seth, I've only met him once when he came in and agreed graciously to host our writers roundtable for this.
I love it.
For the start. It was
that's one of the best extra features on a DVD anywhere.
Oh, and it's funny that I was extrapolating something I did for the Valley Girl DVD back in 2003 when we had Martha Coolidge and Nicolas Cage just talk to each other. And I said to Roger, I go, we could do that and do these roundtable discussions where we're not asking questions and let people and see what. And when we called up, I knew Seth was a fan because we had interviewed him as well on his own. But when he came in and did that, he comes in with like 20 handwritten pages of notes. Now, when you first met him and started working, did you share your passion for Star Trek?
That's how I got the job. So it was between me and a writing team for this job. I come in, Dan Palladino, again, who I'd worked with years ago and had known that I was a big Star Trek fan, brings it up in the job interview. I am sure that was the tipping point for Seth. Because then what started in the Family Guy writers' room was Seth would do, some quote from the original Star Trek, and I'd have to name the episode, which I never failed at. And then now on the set of the Orville, he'll play a music cue from one of the episodes, and I have to name the episode. And I've never failed on that.
Is that from the original series or Next Gen? Or
original? I'm not very good at Next Gen.
Yeah, but the original series, to my mind, the greatest CD set ever in the history of man is La La Land's box set.
It's right up here. I got it right here.
It's the greatest. Getting the music from Elaine of Troyes, the battle music when they're being it's the best thing ever. But now I digress. So obviously you had a great working relationship with Seth, and you worked for a long time. You guys worked together for a long time.
We're still working together.
Working, but
it's almost like 20 years. I mean, it's we did that one season together at Family Guy. It was canceled. I ended up on Futurama, and then I ended up on Enterprise after Futurama. And I got him. He guest starred on.
I know. I was going to say.
So I introduced him to Brannon, and they ended up doing Cosmos together. And
could you talk about you pitched, like you said, you pitched every Star Trek show.
Right.
How did you finally score? How did you finally hit that mid-court shot and get on to Enterprise?
Yeah. So I was on Futurama. And the one episode of Futurama that I wrote was Where No Fan Has Gone Before, where we reunited the original cast of Trek. And basically, that episode, the history of that episode is that I joined the writer staff of Futurama. They were already talking about some kind of Star Trek episode. The episode they were talking, they'd already gotten Shatner and Nimoy to tentatively agree to be on an episode together. And so their idea was, the first idea they had was giant Shatner and giant Nimoy get in a fight in like Godzilla and Mega Godzilla, and which would have been hilarious too. I'm not, but then I come on the staff and it wasn't even my turn to write a script, but it was so clear to David Cohen within 2 weeks of me getting there that I was the biggest Star Trek fan in a group of Star Trek fans. It was, that they gave me that script, and we developed this episode together. With Dan Weber was on the staff there, and very well. So we wrote that episode, reunited the original cast, which was just fantastic. I still actually have the studio recording of Shatner and Nimoy recording together and joking around. It's just fantastic.
Now, I got this is kind of going to be a weird, I don't know if it's a weird aside or not, but I want to ask you about your fandom of Star Trek.
Well, before I get there, I'm just going to tell you how I got on Enterprise, which was your question. So, Futurama, I got some notice for that. Chris Black, who was a writer on Enterprise, and he was on Enterprise, and my agent just called and got me this interview with Brannon, and I think Part of it was Chris Black saying we should look at this guy because they wanted Enterprise to be lighter. But when I finally got that job interview with Brandon, because I met Brandon years before, he didn't remember me. It'd been 10 years since I pitched the Star Trek. I have read every interview with Brandon Braga. So I am sitting in an interview parroting back to him everything he's ever said about Star Trek. And, so I was saying, well, I think what's great is you're writing a mystery one week, a Western the next. He's like, well, that's what I've always liked about Star Trek. But I think the way I got in, honestly, was when I went in, he asked me to talk about the episodes of the first season. And I listed all the best episodes of the first. This was the second season of Enterprise. I'd seen the whole first season. And I talk about the best episodes of that season. There were some clunkers in that first season, but there were some great episodes.
Yeah.
And what Brandon said in that meeting was, well, you've identified all the ones that I think are the best episodes. So, but I didn't criticize anything because I would not have gotten hired if I'd come in and said, boy, that was a piece of shit. that one with the rogue planet and the ghost, they're terrible. But so he didn't criticize anything, but I think that so in that moment, the fact that I was a big Star Trek fan, the fact that I'd said a lot of the right things about the first season, and the fact that they were looking to lighten up, to keep Enterprise light. They thought my comedy experience would help. So that's how I got it. So now ask me about my Star Trek fan.
Well, to me, there's I in my own mind and throughout my own life, I've divided Star Trek fans into two camps, especially of the original series. There's people that take it very seriously, that they look beyond the colors or they look beyond the production limitations of the 60s, and I consider myself this kind of fan. I don't think that sets look cheap. I don't think, okay, the planetary sets are stage bound. These are just things that were factors of when the show was made. I'm not, and then there are what I call the campy fans, the fans that, the music from Amok Time plays, or they talk about the Mugatu or the hot girls or whatever. They still love Star Trek, but they tend to fall on the campy side of things. And I was very serious about it. Now I'm curious because we never talked about this before, but you've written these great, Federation is a history book about the first 150 years of the Federation, and you have written the autobiography of Picard and the autobiography of Kirk that are very, in my mind, the kind of books I like. I mean, I've bought every single Star Trek book that was ever published, and I read them. And your books are reverential, and they're, in my mind, in my head canon, canonical. I mean, I know we've talked about certain things that weren't. But and you being a comedy writer, I would just see you as being the fun. But having grown up reading the Whitfield book, I would think that, you might take Star Trek seriously. And having read your actual Star Trek books, they're very serious, and I loved them. So
I'm glad.
What did you? I mean, I've got although my Sulu I've got the plastic tray that it sits in. Sulu. I guess I need to change the batteries.
Yeah.
But the what kind of Star Trek fan were you? I mean, obviously you were steeped in it.
I was steeped in it. I wasn't. I always had a little distance from it. I think because my mother and sisters, in my house, I took so much abuse for being a Star Trek fan within the walls of my house. So there's a way in which I could never fully embrace it, but I did embrace it. It was my thing. And I think, I don't know what it is. I think that as a writer and producer now, I really appreciate that original series in a way. If you look at the shows that were made in the 60s, nobody had an attention to detail that show had.
Right.
What they were, I think they talk about Nimoy's acting as Spock. Nimoy is pretty much the only Vulcan we see for 3 seasons, with the exceptions of his dad and Amok Time. Yet his performance, it's not just the writing, it's the performance.
Oh, yeah.
Convinces you there's a planet of these people. You never question that. And and I think there's a lot of comparisons made between Star Trek and Star Wars because they created those special effects, they created this world, they had to create technology to make that show, the way Lucas had to create technology to make Star Wars, and to create his world. And so, to me, I think I identify with the creators. So for me, you know, and yet I turn on Star Trek, and I'm 11 years old again, and I can enjoy that. It transports me away, and I'm enjoying that world. They created a world for people to experience, and it's funny, ironically, maybe not ironically, Michael Chabon, who's now doing the CBS, wrote an essay that I love called Fan Fiction on Sherlock Holmes, and it talks about how the Sherlock Holmes fans are the first fans who wanted to create their own stories, and that it's a model for all the other fandom that's come. And and Star Trek is, that Star Trek creates a world that people want to play in.
Right.
Whether it's as a passive player or as an active player, writing fan fiction, or being a professional writer and doing your own sort of professional fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't cosplay Star Trek, so I'm not
right
level, but I am. I love it. I mean, I love it.
Yeah, so I never cosplay. I never wanted to dress up, but in terms of I really took it seriously. Like the blueprints, the world, the Franz Joseph technical manual, poring over that, but I was always aware that it was a TV show. Like I loved the Whitfield book and how things were produced. Right. But in my own mind, like when I started buying Star Trek novels, even before pocket books started after Motion Picture came out, I took those books seriously. Like I didn't, in my mind, there were books I liked better than others. Like when Kathleen Sky's Vulcan came out and there's a giant ant and Spock with a phaser protecting a woman, I'm like, what is this garbage? Like I knew that it was not. But when Vonda McIntyre wrote The Entropy Effect, and a lot of the books in the wake of Star Trek The Motion Picture came out, there was a scope and a seriousness to those books that I thought broadened what I felt about Star Trek in my own mind. That's why I love Star Trek The Motion Picture so much, is that it was serious and thoughtful. And if you go back now and watch a lot of Star Trek episodes and then follow it up with Star Trek The Motion Picture, it actually works pretty well, because the motion picture, it follows along the lines of more serious episodes like the Doomsday Machine or the Immunity Syndrome, or episodes that I really liked. And it now the pop culture memory of the original series is camp. It's not in pop culture. Everyone thinks now, well, you can't shoot a show and make it on those cardboard sets. And I'm like, you know what? If you had the exact same Star Trek sets they had in 1966, and you lit them differently and shot them with a 2.35-to-1 lens, the way they're shooting Discovery and Picard now, that show would look amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, DS9 did it. I mean, you were on the Star Trek sets, wasn't that long ago. I mean, 30 years after. The original series. I mean,
No, and that's it. But it's interesting to see, because I find it interesting that now what Star Trek is sort of being subverted to become more along the lines of other things that aren't Star Trek, which I think is sort of strange. Like whether and what I wanted to ask you is, you were there at the end of the Berman and then the Berman Braga. They even joked once that the only reason they made the first 3 seasons of Enterprise was to tee it up for Manny Cotto to come in and do season 4. They said that in our documentaries. But the idea of you were sort of at the tail end when you got the job on Star Trek. Was it a dream come true for you?
Oh yeah, and I always remember the minute when I driving onto that lot. I call Brandon's office to make sure that they have the pass for me to get on the lot. So I'm calling from my car. I'm calling Brandon's office. Terry Metalis, who is now running Picard.
His assistant.
Was Brandon's assistant, exactly. And I saw Terry says, "Oh, David, the pass is there." And he's like, and he says very genuinely, "Welcome to Star Trek." And I get chills even repeating the story. It was truly an amazing moment to me. I remember Brandon took me down to the sets, he's showing me this new set they're building, and he's talking to somebody, and it was a funny moment, and he said, "Oh, David, this is Herman Zimmerman." And as now a Star Trek fan knows who Herman Zimmerman is. I mean, he created all those sets, and I'm like, "Oh my god, like I could do that." and they're both looking at each other like, "Who's this bozo?" But you just these incredible moments of I got LeVar directed, then Roxanne Dawson directed, so I could meet them. And Brandon, I was a huge fan of Brandon as a writer. I mean, to get to work for Brandon was very exciting. I was always a fan of a lot of his work is seminal in Star Trek. So I think that the tail end is that they were the last connection to Roddenberry.
Yeah.
And Roddenberry is obviously a mixed bag. I don't think he's been. I don't know that we can hold. He created this thing, but it's clear that when he was in charge of Next Gen, he wasn't a good influence. I don't think. But he created rules. He had rules that Rick made everybody else follow, and Rick and Mike Pillar, and then Jerry Taylor, hired all these super talented writers, Ron Moore and Renee and Brandon and Rob Wolf and Ira Bear and Ira hired
Naren Shankar.
Yeah, and Noreen Shankar. You just incredibly talented writers who figured out how to do great writing within the rules.
Right.
And that's, I think, maybe what you're talking about is that they don't seem to be following those same rules anymore. Which, as a Star Trek fan, it's not necessarily the way I would do it, but whatever. I mean, that those shows seem to be finding their audience. I mean,
maybe.
Well, whatever.
Yeah. But being there, I mean, for you, it's interesting that you, as a kid that never had aspirations necessarily to work in Hollywood, you found yourself. It went full circle. Your childhood dream has now been realized, and you've had a decent career. You've got a lot of credits under your belt. You've written for video games. You've written for shows. Did you ever want to get into features?
Well, I've written movies. They've never been made, or they. I mean, I've done a lot of. I wrote for Warner Brothers. I wrote a remake of Who's Killing the Great Chefs of Europe.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
That was something that had been developed for years. In the 90s, my partner and I wrote for Warner Brothers an Aquaman animated film. He and I did a lot of feature work. It never got made. And the two Fred movies that you mentioned were originally supposed to be theatrical, and then the producer sold them to Nickelodeon. I wrote I've written specs. I've written, but it's just I'm not known in that world because I haven't had the same kind of success that I have in television.
Now, what did Seth say to you when you told him you were on staff on Enterprise?
I think he was excited. I think he was pretty excited. I think he was excited when he met Brandon. I mean, they became friends immediately. And, both of them have such a mutual respect for each other, and Seth had been such a fan of Brandon's work. So.
Well, that's how Brandon was the one who suggested Seth, I think, that we interview him, that he hosts that roundtable.
Yeah.
And that which is great, and obviously their work on Cosmos and things like that. So you stayed on Enterprise, and I think it ended before its time. Now, at the same time, I'm curious.
I actually left after the third season because Seth called because Family Guy was coming back.
Oh, right, okay.
Seth asked me to come run Family Guy with him. So I didn't actually work. I worked with Manny on the third season, but not the season that was really his baby.
Right.
And
That's
then
funny that Seth took you away from Star Trek.
This was a real. I mean, to get to run Family Guy was pretty exciting. So.
Yeah. Well, you got it. Absolutely.
Right.
So I'm curious now. Being the president of the WGA,
Yeah.
If we could delve a little bit into over the course of your time, in '88 was the writer's strike that actually affected the second season of Star Trek: The Next Generation. How did you feel about the Writers Guild? And as a writer, as all these different things have happened in terms of residuals and payments, and you've seen the entire industry has completely changed, and now streaming and everything is from when the time you started, the whole business in terms of the value of people and their contributions has been altered. And you're now at the forefront of a battle to make sure that the creators of these shows get their due when the entire business model of the last 30 years has completely changed. How have you felt about that? I mean, I don't want to get into any issues that might cause a problem for you to talk about now, but I'm curious as to how often do I get to talk to the president of Writers Guild of America? I mean, how have you felt about that, and what has the role of the Writers Guild been, and as you've seen it over the last 30 years, I guess?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the Guild is something I think some writers really take for granted. It's been around for a while. I think, we work in a business where it's, you're working job to job. You don't really unless you get on a show like The Simpsons or Family Guy,
right.
It's not steady work. You're always having to sell yourself. You're always having to look and figure out, and always having to reinvent yourself as the market changes and all these kinds of things. And what the Guild does, and has done effectively, is provide a backstop. It provides health and pension, a very good health plan if you earn enough money and to get in. And it's not, most of our members get health insurance, and it's a very good health plan. And what that allows you to do is ride out the peaks and valleys. I've talked in this interview, which I feel like I'm enjoying it, but this is long. It's a long interview, Rob.
Come on, dude. I'll keep you on here for as long as I can. I want to paint a picture.
That's fine. So,
as long as you have the time.
I do. No. So anyway, you have peaks and valleys. You have successes, and then you don't. And then there's a year where you work, and then there's a year where you don't. And what the Guild does is make sure that you have a bit of a backstop. You've got the health insurance. You've got residual. So the story that I tell, and the reason why that really opened my mind to the value of the Guild, was I hit a really bad part of my career a little while after I broke up with my partner, where I was having trouble getting work. I had worked I'd worked with somebody who didn't like working with me, and it caused me difficulties finding more work. And I had a house, and I had a kid, and I'm getting a little scared. I'm starting to think, maybe I can't be a writer anymore. Maybe I've got to figure out something else to do. And I literally started putting a resume together to try to get a job as an executive, because I wasn't making enough money to support my family. And then I got a giant residual check for Team Knight Rider, this show that was not a success, but had made somebody money. And because of the Writers Guild contract, they had to pay me a piece of it. And so that opened my mind to, and that check allowed me to stay a writer, allowed me to not finish that resume and hang it a little longer looking for work. And I found work, and everything worked out.
And you had no idea you were going to get that check?
No idea. And so I think, and that's what residuals are about. They're about saying writers created this work at whether they created a show or they just wrote an episode of the show. If that show is going to make somebody money, the writer's got to get his cut.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the importance of the Guild. And I understood that suddenly the importance of the Guild. And then when I got involved with the Guild, Patrick Verone had been a writer on Futurama with me, and he really introduced me to Guild politics. I started to understand that the Guild is not in any way a permanent thing. It's something that requires participation. It requires the writers who are in the Guild to volunteer their time, and also to show solidarity together to maintain the benefits we've fought for over the years. So as the business changes, the Guild tries to see the future. So the best example is in 2007 when we went on strike. We went on strike for the internet. That is, we went on strike so that if you wrote a show that was streamed on the internet, they would have to pay you your union wages. Now, what people don't remember is there was no streaming in 2007.
Right. Right.
Like we were fighting for something that didn't exist, but we knew was coming. Hulu, the first streaming platform, went live the day the strike ended. So the companies were fighting us. They did not want to give us this coverage. They were hoping that this would be a new Wild West where they could pay writers whatever they wanted. And because we went on strike and because we got that coverage, now 20% of the members who are members of the Writers Guild work on shows and movies that wouldn't be covered if we hadn't gone on strike. So that ends up being, to me, the people think about strike and the crazy guild and it didn't get anything. No, we got something truly important because the leadership at that time saw the future.
Okay.
So, yeah.
What has now, obviously the COVID pandemic has curtailed this. What has changed since 2007? Since the things that you gained, I mean, I know that a lot has changed, but for people that might not know where the business is at now as opposed to where it was in 2007, what's different today?
Well, the big difference now is back then it was starting to change, and it's what you call vertical integration, where back when we were kids, you had studios, you had networks. Studios sold product to networks. They competed with each other to sell to the network. Now, studios own networks. Disney owns ABC. Comcast owns NBC. 20th Century Fox used to own Fox. Then now 20th Century Fox is owned by Disney. In any event, and now they're all starting their own streaming services. So Disney has Disney Plus and Hulu. Comcast is going to have Peacock. Warner Brothers is going to have HBO Max. So they're launching all their streaming services with the idea that everything will sort of be siloed. Like the manufacturer and the broadcast will all be in, and there will be, right now Disney's is the biggest.
Yeah.
But then you also have Netflix, which is the streaming service that makes its own product and is very, major player, and Amazon Prime, this weird company that because you get free shipping, you can also get TV shows, I mean,
how does that work when you're figuring out how much people get paid?
But there's some great stuff on Amazon Prime too.
Yep.
I mean, there are great shows everywhere.
The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is an unbelievably well-produced TV show. Amazing
show. Produced by Dan Palladino, who got me hired on Family Guy. So, with his wife, Amy Sherman Palladino. So the siloing of the business means that if you're working for a company, it becomes harder to fight. There's less companies, so there's less competition for talent, the guild is there to make sure that as we move forward in this new age where these giant companies control everything, that we don't just become cogs in the wheel, that writers are getting paid their value.
And if you create
so that's the biggest.
Yeah, and if you create something that becomes a hit show,
Right.
before there was a great article that was published on Medium yesterday that a guy wrote. It talks a lot about the future of Hollywood, and he goes into a lot about this and how what's happening is it can create even a wild west for producers, like indie producers now. If they can find the financing, they're making things and selling directly to the streaming services, and there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think the guild it needs. I am not in the Writers Guild, but I'm a proponent of it. I've made projects where I've become a guild signatory.
Oh, good.
And and like even in independent projects, I firmly believe in doing that. And I think that this horror movie that I just finished, I produced it 12 years ago, I just finished a Blu-ray for it. We did all the special features, the director and I,
Right.
because we make special features and no one was going to do that. So we did, because it was footage I shot in Bulgaria 12 years ago. And I'm like, well, great. And, Janet Montgomery, who starred in the movie, now she's on New Amsterdam. And so I had all this great footage. I'm like, hey, great, we can finally use it. But that was a film that went from being a $350,000 indie thing that we were going to do, and we flipped it to Warner Brothers, and it became a Dark Castle movie, and so the Guild came in, and it became a WGA movie, which was great for Dave Scow, who wrote it, and it all worked well. And so I'm a big proponent of the WGA. And what I want to do before I get, because I want to end this, I want to take you up to the Orville and talk about that, but I think it's really important that you are the president and you were reelected, again, which means obviously your constituency, the members of the Guild, believe in you,
right?
And why shouldn't they? So that's a great vote of confidence, and you're now leading the charge at a time of great transition when everyone's trying to figure out, well, what the hell's going on, and you are at this pivotal point in history in terms of the industry. Not let's throw in the pandemic, which has shut the entire industry down. Like, my God, what's going to happen? Yeah. How is anyone going to get production insurance now? I mean, it's just crazy. But still, you got to keep your eye on the prize and think about writers and creators, because it's not like I'm doing some small work on a project that Ashley Miller created. That's a Netflix show that comes out in, fourth quarter of this year. And, it's been interesting watching. And I've been privy to all their notes. Like, I've never been involved in the creation of a TV show before, and it's been very fascinating to watch it all and watch how all the writers work and all of that. But so, do you have? Are you optimistic about the future in terms of the writers' role, both as far as feature film writers and then as a creator on television or now on streaming? Do you think that there's going to be security and moving forward as these bigger conglomerations have bought and, like you said, siloed all this material and people and personnel and mostly their shows, the creations that you guys are coming up with? Are you optimistic about the future of the business as being a place where people can make a living?
I'm not optimistic or pessimistic. I understand the fight that's required. I think that's the issue, is that at certain points, you have, in order for you to protect yourself, these are big companies. They're all about business. They're all about keeping the profit margins, having large profit margins and doing well. And it's not personal, and they just want to do well. And one way they do well is by paying people less. Everybody, not just writers, but actors, directors, and so it's not that I'm optimistic or pessimistic. The Guild is used to standing up for writers. I think we have some very good leaders now on the board of directors, but also in our captain system and in our membership, writers who understand what's at stake. So I think that this business, like many other businesses, pushes out the middle class, and it'll be at some point a fight to make sure that writers get their due. But because these companies are going to be making lots and lots of money from the product we produce.
Well, one of the things that happened that I don't think a lot of people pay much attention to is I was fascinated by this. A show like Friends. Friends has been off the air for a long time, many years. Last year, Netflix paid $90 million, $100 million just to run Friends for a year. This is a show that's been made. Now, the people that wrote that show, the writing they did when that show originally aired, apparently still has a lot of value. And I mean, when you can sell a show for a year for $100 million, the reason you are able to sell that show to Netflix is because it was well written.
Right.
It was well created. So there is value if you have a good writing staff and you have great creative people and great showrunners. The things that they create, their shelf life can be decades long. And that, I think, is something that has to be recognized. And that show wouldn't be as valuable if it wasn't as well written and beloved as it was. And that's something that I know these creators want to make it, well, we'll just give you a one-time payment. And it's like, well, how is that fair if 25 years later you sell what I wrote for $100 million?
No, I mean, it's sort of getting similar back to the old studio system, and that's what we sort of have to make sure doesn't happen. But because, these companies need the work of writers, that's where writer leverage comes in. So, you think about Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek's on every streaming service. The original Star Trek is on Netflix. It's on Hulu. It's on CBS All Access. It's Amazon. It's on, which means all those streaming services paid for it.
Yep.
They paid money for this show that's 50 years old because there's still people watching it. And that's, like, again, a testimony to its creative achievement.
Well, what's interesting is 30, 40 years ago, people would, you got syndication payments and, and you'd sell your shows to foreign countries. A lot of money would start rolling in, and people could get very, very wealthy. But now I think that there's this, I think all content, doesn't matter whether it's TV or music, in our digital age has somehow been devalued. And because, after all, it's just files now, it's who's working on it. Like, well, no, it has to be made. I mean, I've been working on the same independent movie for 4 years right now. It's finally done.
That's a big problem, I think, in terms of the audience and expectation from some of the audience who stealing stuff, for, not paying for it and not understanding that if you don't pay for this, we won't be able to make it.
Right.
And you'll be watching cat videos, but cat videos do very well. So,
Well, now, I mean, I'm glad. Thank you for touching on the WGA. I wanted to get your philosophy of that without getting overtly political, but thank you for that. I think people will understand. So now the Orville, from where I'm coming from, the Orville is obviously, as a Star Trek fan, and there's now a battle comparing and contrasting and all that. But the thing about the Orville that it's readily apparent if you watch the Orville, how much love and affection. I mean, you've got half the staff of Next Generation people, whether it's writing, directing, you guys, Seth, everybody. Could you tell me a little bit about maybe the inception of the Orville? Like, how did Seth even come up with it, and how did he get it sold to the studio, and what can we expect to see in the third season, and when is it going to happen?
To answer the last question first, we were shooting the third season when the pandemic hit. So
how far into the third season were you, and how many episodes?
About halfway.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So we've got to get back into production, hopefully whenever it's safe, but I don't know when that is. But that obviously delays when the show will be finished.
Now, where were you shooting the third season?
We shoot here. We shoot in Los Angeles.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, we shoot on the 20th Century Fox lot. So the inception of the show, I take a little bit of credit for, because basically what happened was, Seth and I were talking about Star Trek, and I think Brian Fuller had just signed to do Discovery, and we were talking about it, and Seth was talking about the kind of show he'd like to see. He wasn't, Seth personally didn't want to do like a dark show, and I think given Brian's credits, he may have been worried that Discovery would be dark, and he starts talking about the kind of show he wants to do, and I just said, well, the phone call, we're just chatting, two Star Trek fans chatting, but Seth is, he's also
incredibly powerful in Hollywood and can get things done.
Well, I mean, he's a creative, force. I mean, so I say to him, why don't you just do your own? And he says, well, Star Trek is a shorthand. And I said, I don't know. I think if you put people in a uniform on a spaceship, they're going to get it. And so that's all I said. I mean, so 2 weeks later, he calls me up 3 weeks later. It's not very long, 3 weeks, I think. Yeah, I wrote that script and gave it to Fox, and they picked it up for 13.
Man, I love having power in Hollywood. Just get things done.
I think that I think the thing is that Seth has a brand,
Right.
and brand matters so much in the selling of the show. Even though Orville isn't really exactly on his Family Guy brand, it is actually kind of on his Cosmos brand,
Right.
and it expands his brand. But I think there was some confusion from the audience in the beginning, who thought it was going to be this wacky, dirty comedy show, and that may have been surprised that it actually takes itself seriously, takes its stories seriously, and science fiction seriously. So, very exciting to be at the inception of this. And at the time, I was back at Family Guy. I'd left a couple of times. I've gone back, and I was, I actually, the call I got before I got the call from Seth, I was actually on a college tour with my must have been my daughter. Yeah, I was on a college tour with my daughter and my wife, and I get this call from the showrunner of Family Guy, who says, "Yeah, Seth's going to call you. He wants you to go over his sci-fi show." And I'm like, "What sci-fi show?" So it all happened really fast. But
Wow.
It was great to be there at the beginning, and getting to work with Jon Favreau on the pilot was great. Added a lot of stuff that in terms of the tone of the show and where the show went, and it's a great cast. I mean, really terrific cast. So.
Well, I'm curious, one of the things I really appreciate about the Orville is it kind of takes what Michael Piller brought to Next Generation in the third season, where he made the stories, instead of something coming from the outside, the stories all stemmed from each character. Like, we're going to start our stories with our characters as opposed to them dealing with some outside force. It had to spring from the character first. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about the Orville is you've got all these. I love the fact that the Mauchline race, and the fact that these two guys are parents to this kid, and there's all you're making. You're like, well, this is our gendered species. You're making commentary like Star Trek does, and but it's all character based, and like you do. I think that's very unique. I think that's why people really respond to the show as much as they do. I mean, there's a lot of people as Star Trek fans. Now you can have camps. It hasn't been so much fun. It hasn't been this. I haven't had this much fun as a fan watching fan battles about things. It's been so long since it's been that. It's pretty nuts. And when you see the other camp, I think they went way darker than Brian Fuller ever would have gone. And I've never seen so much murder and death on a Star Trek. The first 10 episodes of Picard, every episode there was straight up murders and beheadings and massacres and all of that.
It didn't. It is interesting. It wasn't. I think it's very well. I think Discovery is very well produced and very well acted. It's just not my Star Trek, I guess is what I would say. It's like it's.
No, not mine either.
But I mean, I watched it.
Yeah, sure. I don't miss an episode.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah,
I enjoyed it. I mean, I'm not even like saying, God, I hate this. I'm not in the camp. I enjoyed it because I think it's well done. But it's not my Star Trek, I guess.
Right.
It's not. Yeah.
Well, are you guys, when you're making the Orville, are you aware now that there's this other? Is there a rivalry at all? Or are you just guys doing your own thing and doing what you want to do and not paying attention?
I don't think we see. No, I don't. There's no rivalry. It's not like we're writing the show, we're paying attention to what they're doing.
Right.
We've created sort of our own universe that we have to sort of be responsible to, I guess. And then Seth is a filmmaker. So for Seth, he wants to create things that are big and memorable and so I mean, Seth is a true creator in the sense that he's on the set every minute, even if he's not acting. He's working with the director. This year he's directing half the episodes.
Yeah.
John Cassar's directing the other half. When we had other directors, he worked very closely with them. Every casting decision is his. Every special effect decision, every production design. You know, I mean, he's given stuff, but it's all, every decision is his. It really is his show. We're there to help him get it done.
Well, you've done some really interesting. There's throwback things, like you have physical models on the show, you know, and which was, I think, terrific. Yeah. And there's a lot of I really enjoy, like, the lighting on the sets, the colors and the costumes. You know, it's if this makes any sense, you watch the Orville and it makes you happy just because the way it looks. Well, you know, it puts a smile on your face.
That's intentional. I mean, that really is what Seth always would say about Next Generation, is that the Next Generation bridge felt like the waiting room of a dentist's office. But he didn't say that in a negative way. It's sort of positive. It's sort of comfortable. It's sort of like welcoming, and it's like, you know, and to me, the best example of the contrast of, you know, Star Trek, the sequel prequel series after Next Gen got progressively sort of darker. You know, Deep Space Nine was darker than Next Gen. I think Voyager was darker than Deep Space Nine. And Enterprise was so dark in some ways that when they did that last episode, these were Voyages, and you went from the Enterprise sets into the Next Gen sets, it was almost like, oh my God.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
You know, it was like this subtle thing that happened over time. And I think that's what, a way in which Seth wanted to recapture that, what you just said, that feeling of being happy and bright colors and the place you want to be.
Well, now that you're creating this, you've got your own canonical universe, and the fact that you're getting a third season, you're going into a third season. Are you going to embrace the idea of serialized storytelling, and are you setting up a much bigger narrative that's going to play out over multiple seasons?
No, we still stick to the idea that if you turn on the show, you want if you're new to the show and you turn on an episode, that you're not, you know, what's going on here? I don't know who these characters are. Like I think that, having said that, because we've done 2 seasons and now we're going to be on Hulu, which will be streaming, there will be a little more, I don't want to say serialization, but a little bit more connectivity between the episodes. And so there are arcs in season 3, character arcs, story arcs that play out over the course of episodes, but the episodes are still sort of individual episodes on their own that tell a complete story, which is always was really important in the creation of this. And because I think that, again, like, the thing I always say about original Star Trek, and then also this was true, I think, for Next Generation, was there's 3 kinds of Star Trek fans, Rob. The 2 you named, and then the world.
Oh, right. Okay, you're absolutely right.
Star Trek was a popular show among regular people. That's what Mark Cushman, I think, uncovered so brilliantly in his books, that the ratings were good. The idea that the story that, well, the ratings weren't good, that's why it wasn't canceled. No, they were fine. Most of the world, a lot of the people watching network television watched Star Trek in its original run.
Yeah.
Those syndication was not supported by Star Trek fans. It was supported by the world loving this show.
That's
true. And
true.
there's a few of us who take it a little too seriously. But,
come on, man.
But that's what I'm saying, is that, and that's what Seth wanted to get back to with Orville, which is, yes, it's a show for sci-fi fans, but it's also a show for
everyone,
an audience. My daughter and her roommate would watch it. You know, like, it was. They're not sci-fi fans. Like, you know, that. So I think that that's what I think that was one of the things I think I found watching the first season of Discovery that I bumped on a little, was there were episodes where, okay, I'm getting everything that's going on in this episode, but I'm a deep dive Star Trek fan.
Right.
If I wasn't, would I understand what's going on here? And I couldn't answer the question. Whereas at Orville, anybody can watch Orville.
That's a really, you know, I think that's an incredible point that you just made that I certainly have forgotten. And, I think you've succeeded with the Orville. Are there things? I mean, obviously, we talked about the Orville comic books and things like that. There, Jeff Bond, his book on the making of the Orville, the coffee table book. I don't know if that's come out yet, or is that?
Oh no, that came out last year.
Okay, it came out last year. So the Orville is definitely servicing the fan in me is happy with the direction the Orville is going.
We've got Eagle Moss ships coming this year.
I know, and I was going to say once I get my 1/350th scale model of the Orville, the circle will be complete. I don't know if that. I mean, Eagle Moss, yes, but we need round 2 to be making to go along.
We've got that too.
Yeah, well, that's good because I need that. I need it. It's got to be 1/350th scale. It's got to be big, David. Big. None of these Eagle Moss is fine.
I got it.
But now let me ask you this then. Finally, to sort of bring it full circle, you have written these Star Trek books, which is something you didn't have to do.
That's true.
I mean, it's not like, look, as much as I love my Star Trek novels, I understand that, maybe they're not the biggest bestsellers in the world, and yet you've put so much care and time. I loved getting Federation the first 150 years, and I loved reading your autobiographies of Picard and Kirk, and I'm like, how did you come to write those? Like, what the research and the what you had to go through, and how did you possibly? I mean, for those of you who don't know, David Goodman, between writing television in his life and working in an industry where he can make a lot of money, has written. Now, are you doing the autobiography of Spock now?
I guess it's a reveal. I'm not anymore.
You're not? Okay.
I wasn't. I was. And I couldn't.
I didn't know because I didn't think you were. I heard somebody else was doing it, but
yes,
yeah. So
gave it to, I had a contract to do it, and I essentially gave the money back because I couldn't quite crack it.
Oh, because okay, but let's talk about the 3 that you did write, and they're amazing. Like if you're a Star Trek fan. And me, I had to buy the space flight chronology, and I had a Franz Joseph technical manual. Federation, the first 150 years, right up my alley. I mean, it's great. So, how did you go about writing these books? What was your process?
It's interesting. So Dave Rossi, Dave.
Dave,
I'd worked with Dave on Enterprise, and a few years after Enterprise, he said that John Van Sitters and CBS Consumer Products was looking for somebody to write this book, and they had the idea for the book, which was, a book which would have sort of historical documents in it, which was based on this John Adams book that came out where they did this large version, John Adams biography. They did a large version where they had facsimiles of letters and documents. And so Dave Rossi said that they were looking for a TV writer who could write in different voices, and he thought of me, which was lovely.
Right.
I mean, for somebody to call you up and offer you this, and I really kept saying, I've never written a book before, Dave. You sure? You sure they want to let me do this? I've never done this. So, I mean, your idea of like, how did you end up doing this? I'm still like in awe. I met with Van Sitters, and the reason I wanted to do it is I wanted to do the Romulan War. As a Star Trek fan, that's like the biggest hole in Star Trek. Like, it's mentioned in Balance of Terror. It leads to the Federation. It's, other people, even at that time, nobody still had done it. A few novels came out eventually.
Yeah.
But at that moment, nobody done it. It was clean. Like nobody had touched it. And I really wanted to. It's my favorite chapter of the book, and I kind of started there and worked outward in the sense of what do I want the Romulan War to be? Because that was something that I created. Like I created the Romulan War in that book. So then it became a matter of filling in the holes. Like, what do I know? What do I know about the Third World War? Which was, again, so inconsistent in Star Trek.
Yeah.
Is the Third World War the eugenics wars? Is that the same thing? Well, yes and no. And I had to figure out how, the thing the line that bugged me in the pilot of Enterprise more than any Star Trek anywhere was, well, 50 years we got rid of, famine and poverty, not too bad. And I'm like, that's the show I want to see. I want to see that Star Trek prequel. How did they solve that?
Like a West Wing show, an Aaron Sorkin penned Star Trek show about putting the world back together.
Yeah, or put Enterprise put a spaceship show in a world where they're figuring that out. Anyway. So I had to figure that out. And then, so what do I know about Zephyr Cochrane? So it's like I had an unfinished puzzle, basically.
Yeah.
And then I had to make sure that the pieces that I came up with fit. And again, as you talk about like the novels that you read, Kathleen Sky, or any kind of book that I read as a Star Trek fan that didn't fit what I already knew, drove me insane.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
So that was my goal in writing Federation was, you read this book, it's going to fit. And I'm going to come up with some, I hope, clever things. And there were some things in there that I threw in that were ideas that I'd had of a human spy on Vulcan, disguised as a Vulcan in the early years, and that he eventually becomes Vulcan. Logic seeps into him, and suddenly he's logical. And I have that's a piece of the book, like all these sort of ideas I'd had. And I think, a lot of fun things in there that I came up with that in terms of filling out the puzzle. But it was hard, but it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed, and that's, I think, what Star Trek fans like to do with their fan fiction is fill in the holes.
Yeah, I mean, Larry Nemeczek told me about when he was younger, he was what he called, it was interviewing him on the Blu-rays, he said, I was a backgrounder. I said, you're a backgrounder? And he's like, yeah, we had this group like in like Doug Drexler in his younger days was a backgrounder. Right. These guys were, because Doug Drexler, they like had the Federation Trading Post in New York,
yeah.
And making I've got all that stuff. Their little technical manuals that they made. And in my mind, wow, this is all real. It's all made by, but it was great. I mean, it's great to get that. I think that was the last. I mean, other than the encyclopedias and Larry Nemeczek's Star Charts books, I like that Federation book is great. You signed mine.
Thank you. I did. Good.
You did.
The Doug Drexler's now working on the Orville.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I don't know if you read his Facebook post about how it's the greatest job he's ever had in his life.
Yeah. No, I read that. Yeah,
first of all, he's one of the greatest guys in the world.
Greatest guy.
And his wife Dorothy too, or I just like to call her the Duder because her last name, it's great, Duder. What a great last name. But he's amazing. He designed the NX-01.
That's right. Yeah. Oh, crazy. He's had more. He's got his fingerprints all over like stuff for years.
For years. I mean, him and the I'm like, I don't know why Mike and Denise aren't working for you. They should be. Bring the old art department back together. The whole team
back together.
Yeah, bring everybody back together.
But then after Federation, I thought that was going to be it. I wasn't looking to become the Star Trek book writer, but then Dave Rossi pitches this idea of Kirk's autobiography, and again they asked me if I want to do it, and that also was again like it's the unfinished puzzle. But that one, the thing that I really wish somebody else could dramatize, because it's not enough that it's in this book, is the thing I figured. There's a bunch of things that I figured out, which were Kirk was a father the whole time he was captain of the Enterprise. Yeah, he's an absent father. That adds this level to all the father-son shit that goes on with the young officers. And then McCoy is also an absent father.
Yeah.
And so that's their connection. There's all this stuff. And that all, as I was writing that book, more than any other book I've written, I was pulling in, 30 years of watching Star Trek, 40 years of it, I don't know, of watching Star Trek, and that's my love letter. That's my love letter to the fandom of
well, now I have to ask you, because Roddenberry also himself wrote in Kirk's voice in the novelization for the motion picture.
I read that.
Did you go back and utilize it's small, it's just an introduction, but did you ever go back to that and say, here's the creator of Star Trek who actually wrote in universe Kirk's voice in prose form.
I did. It was what I went to first before I wrote a word, and hoping that he was going to give me a roadmap.
Right.
He did not.
Yeah, I know.
That introduction is terrible. It's filled with so much. See, that's the thing, is that I take Star Trek seriously, but I'm also critical of Star Trek. My favorite line from my Futurama episode is when Fry is talking to the head of Leonard Nimoy, and he says to him, Star Trek, 79 episodes, about 30 good ones. When we showed that episode at a Star Trek convention, that line did not get a laugh.
Yeah, no, I would give it more than 30, but I understand. You can't be an old school Star Trek fan without having a healthy sense of humor about the whole thing, really.
Well, I mean, there's some bad ones.
Well, I think, look, this has been a great interview, but I think as a summation, is there anything? Look, there's obviously, I would hope that there's going to be young writers who aspire to write television. The old, if I didn't ask this question, people would be like, why didn't you ask the question? Which is, what advice in this day and age, with the internet, with social media, with all the venues available to people now to hone their craft, what can you tell people that want a career as television or media writers? What could you tell them?
I think that, I mean, I really don't want you to do it. I need the work. So there's that. There's that advice. So, but I also, and I actually mean this seriously, like, nothing can stop talent and hard work. I mean, if you have talent and if you work hard, you will find your way. Because right now there's 500 television shows on all these platforms and the networks, whatever. There's work. There's work out there. People are looking for talented writers, but your work has to be excellent. People often ask me, what kind of spec script should I write? What kind? I'm like, it's not up to me to tell you that. What do you want to do? What do you want to prove in your writing? You have to make something good. That to me is always the thing that separates the working people from the non-working people. People who are again, two examples. Seth, there's one example. He animated the pilot of Family Guy by himself at his kitchen table. By himself, drew it. So that's amazing. That another story I tell of a writer. He had been a sitcom writer for years. He wanted to write dramas. He wrote a spec script. He wanted his agent, could you please send this to Sopranos? His agent wouldn't do it. So this writer used every connection he could. He got his script to the creator of The Sopranos, David Chase. David Chase loved it, hired him. And that script is the Mad Men pilot. And the writer is Matt Weiner, who had written that pilot, and that script got him hired on The Sopranos. And then and he was on The Sopranos for a number of years, and then he does Mad Men after that. But that showed you how good that script was. It got him on the best show on television. And then he made the next best show in television.
Yeah, I got to meet him, and when we were trying to get Free Enterprise 2 made, where our office, we were downtown in LA where they were shooting Mad Men, and he would just pace outside my window. I would go out there, and I don't smoke really, but I occasionally would. I would just do it and talk to him because it was amazing.
He's amazing. But to me, that shows you two things. One, I mean, with the Seth story, hugely talented artist, writer, voice performer.
Singer.
He's exceptional, but he also did all the hard work that got his show made. And then he didn't wait for somebody to come to him. He did it.
Right.
And then Matt Weiner, same thing. He was a working writer, working in sitcoms. He didn't want to do that anymore. He creates this script that is a passkey to his success. And it's that work. And then he makes that show, which is also the work he put into that show. Anyway, those are just two examples, and they may not have any meaning to your audience. But
no, I think that is a lesson you can never hear enough.
Yeah, if you have to do the work. Don't look to somebody else to make you famous. You have to do the work, and you have your iPhone can be a camera. Everybody has a computer to write on. If you want to write, if you want to act, whatever it is, you got to do the work.
Right. Well, on that note, David Goodman, executive producer of the Orville and president of the Writers Guild of America for a second term, I cannot thank you enough for coming on to Robservations, the show about something, and giving us so much of your time today. I think I've been more productive in this quarantine, talking to people and putting about this has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough.
Well, I totally enjoyed it. I've always wanted to just chat with you, so this was great.
Yeah, this was fantastic, and you've always been generous with your time. And if I might point out, you have Orville comics people can get.
Yes.
The third season of the Orville is halfway through. I guess you can work on post for those episodes, but it will get finished. It's going to be on Hulu. Yeah. Is there any you do have 3 Star Trek books? The autobiography
you could buy my Star Trek books.
You can buy them now. Federation: The First 150 Years, the autobiography of Captain James T. Kirk, the autobiography of Captain Picard. Do you have anything else coming up? And do you have any place people can follow you on social media?
I am on Twitter, but I just basically do jokes. But it's David A. Goodman at Twitter, and then I guess I should be making more use of that, huh? I should be trying to sell stuff. I don't know.
Well, after this, people are going to come get you. They're going to follow you.
Yeah, but I think Orville Comics. You can order some, pre-order the new ones. It's going to be fun.
They're good. Well, again, thank you so much for this. What a treat this has been.
Thank you, Rob.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right. I'll talk to you later, man.
Bye.
See ya.